Atheist Uproar, Silenced by a Muslim Child's Salt Logic. In a magnificent debate hall, the atmosphere was tense and electrifying. The auditorium was packed with academics, students, and truth-seekers, all eager to witness an unusual debate. On the stage sat an elderly man with an authoritative presence, Dr. Dilbert, a 62-year-old atheist scientist renowned for his sharp arguments against the existence of God. However, what truly captured everyone's attention was not just Dr. Dilbert, but his opponent, a 7-year-old boy standing with unwavering confidence. His name was Aurelian, a young Muslim boy with an innocent face but extraordinary intelligence. The audience murmured in disbelief. How could a mere child stand against a scientist who had spent decades debating and researching the non-existence of God? Was this a joke, or was something far greater about to unfold? Dr. Dilbert smirked, clearly underestimating his opponent. "All right, little one," he said in a calm but condescending tone. "You want to prove that God exists? I have debated with professors and philosophers, and I have always had an answer for them. What could you possibly say that I haven't heard before?" Aurelian didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his small pocket and pulled out a handful of salt, holding it up for everyone to see. "Doctor," he said clearly, "can you describe the taste of this salt without tasting it?" A hush fell over the room. The audience exchanged puzzled glances, trying to decipher the meaning behind the question. Dr. Dilbert raised an eyebrow and responded, "Of course not. I would have to taste it first to know what it tastes like." Aurelian nodded slowly. "Then if you cannot see or feel something before experiencing it, does that mean this salt does not exist?" Dr. Dilbert hesitated. He had not expected such a question from a child. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience as people began to process the depth of Aurelian's words. "Recovering quickly, Doctor." Dilbert leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Nice trick," he said, his tone still dismissive. "But listen to me carefully, boy. The difference between salt and God is that salt can be tested. I can see it, touch it, and taste it. If I want to prove its existence, I simply have to experience it physically. But God, no one can see, touch, or directly experience him. So how can you compare something scientifically provable with something that is purely based on belief?" Some in the audience nodded in agreement, finding Dr. Dilbert's argument logical. But Aurelian remained unfazed. Instead, he smiled. "Doctor, you just said that one cannot taste salt without tasting it, correct?" Dr. Dilbert nodded. "Of course." Aurelian held up the salt again. "What if someone was born without a sense of taste? What if there were people who could not perceive salty or sweet flavors? Does that mean the salt has no taste?" The room fell silent once again. Dr. Dilbert frowned, clearly caught off guard. He hesitated before replying. "Well, no. The salt still has a taste. It's just that the person lacks the ability to perceive it." Aurelian's smile grew. "Exactly. So, if a person cannot taste something, does that mean it doesn't exist? Or does it simply mean that they lack the ability to perceive it?" Gasps echoed through the audience. Whispers spread as people realized the young boy had just flipped the scientist's logic against him. Dr. Dilbert, for the first time in the debate, seemed momentarily lost for words. Regaining his composure, he leaned forward. "You make an interesting argument," he admitted. "But the problem is not that humans lack the ability to perceive God. The real issue is that God never truly reveals himself. If he exists, why doesn't he show himself to us? Why should we just believe without proof?" More heads in the audience nodded. It was a question that had challenged the minds of many skeptics. But Aurelian didn't seem troubled at all. In fact, he chuckled softly. "Doctor," he said gently, "may I ask you something simple?" Dr. Dilbert studied him for a moment before answering. "Go ahead." Aurelian took a deep breath. "Do you love your mother?" Dr. Dilbert blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected question. After a brief pause, he responded, "Of course." Aurelian nodded. "Can you show me your love for your mother in a way that we can see?" Dr. Dilbert was silent. Aurelian continued, "Love is something we cannot see, hold, or measure with numbers. But we all know it exists. We can feel it, see its effects and actions, and understand its presence, even though we cannot touch it directly." He paused, then locked eyes with Dr. Dilbert. "The same is true for God. We may not see Him directly, but we can feel His presence, witness His signs in our lives, and recognize His existence through His creation. Just as love does not need to be seen to be real, God does not need to be physically visible to exist. We just need to open our hearts to feel Him." A heavy silence enveloped the room. Some in the audience who had previously nodded in agreement with Dr. Dilbert now looked uncertain. Even Dr. Dilbert himself seemed momentarily uneasy. Clearing his throat, he straightened his posture and attempted to steer the debate back in his favor. "You talk about feelings, subjective experiences," he argued. "But in the world of science, we cannot rely on feelings alone. We need concrete proof. If you claim that God exists, where is the evidence? Where is the tangible proof that God created the universe? Isn't it possible that science can explain everything without the need for God?" Aurelian took a small breath and picked up another pinch of salt, holding it tightly in his palm. Do you know why salt is salty?" Dr. Dilbert scoffed. "Of course, its composition, sodium chloride, has chemical properties that give it a salty taste." Aurelian smiled. "That's correct. But does salt know that it is salty?" Dr. Dilbert frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "No, salt doesn't know anything. It's just an inanimate object. It has no awareness of its own properties." Aurelian nodded. "Exactly. Salt does not understand itself. But we, who have consciousness, do. We have the ability to perceive and comprehend things that do not recognize themselves." "Similarly, the universe cannot explain itself," Aurelian continued. "But we, as conscious beings, can. We can see that there is a force that governs everything. There is an intelligence that set the laws of nature, that created balance, and that allows life to exist." He looked Dr. Dilbert straight in the eye. "And that intelligence is God." For the first time in his long career, Dr. Dilbert found himself speechless. He clenched his fingers on the table, struggling to form a response. He had debated scholars, philosophers, and theologians, yet here he was, cornered by the simple yet profound logic of a 7-year-old child. The tension in the room was palpable. The audience sat in stunned silence, realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Previously, those who had supported Dr. Dilbert were now beginning to see Aurelian in a different light. Some of them appeared to be questioning their own beliefs. Dr. Dilbert finally took a deep breath. He needed to regain control of the situation before he lost it entirely. "Okay," he said, his voice softer this time but still firm. "I understand where your thinking is headed, Aurelian, but there is one question that no one, including religious leaders, has been able to answer. If God exists, why is there so much suffering in this world? Why do war, famine, and natural disasters occur? If God is all-loving, why does He allow children to starve, innocent people to suffer, and humans to harm one another?" Some members of the audience who had previously been influenced by Aurelian nodded in agreement. This was a question that often arose in debates about the existence of God. However, Aurelian remained calm, showing no sign of fear. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if this was a question he had pondered for a long time. "Good question, Doctor," he said softly, "and I would like to answer it with something as simple as salt." He turned to the audience. "Who here has ever eaten food that was too salty?" Several people raised their hands, including Dr. Dilbert. "How does it taste?" A man from the front row answered, "It doesn't taste good. Too much salt makes you thirsty." Aurelian nodded. And what if the food has no salt at all? A woman answered, It's tasteless. Aurelian turned back to Dr. Dilbert. Doctor, salt is something good, isn't it? But if there's too much, the food becomes inedible. On the other hand, if there is no salt at all, the food is bland and flavorless. So, is salt good or bad? Dr. Dilbert paused for a moment before answering, It depends on the amount. Aurelian smiled. Exactly. The same applies to suffering, Doctor. If this world were filled only with happiness and no suffering at all, would we truly understand what happiness is? If there were never any pain, how could we appreciate health? If there were no difficulties, how could we feel the joy of success? He paused, allowing his words to sink into the minds of the audience. God created this world with balance, just like salt and food. Not all suffering is punishment, and not all happiness is a reward. There is wisdom in both. This world is a test, and humans have the freedom to choose how they face it. If everyone were forced to be good without any choice, would that truly be considered goodness? The audience began to reflect more deeply. Even those who had been skeptical at first now appeared to be reconsidering their stance. Dr. Dilbert bit his lip. He hadn't expected a child so young to explain such a complex concept with something as simple as salt. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. Leaning back in his chair, he said, Well, I understand your logic, but one question still remains. Why does God need to test us? If he is all-knowing, doesn't he already know who will pass and who will fail? Aurelian smiled again. Doctor, have you ever been a teacher? Dr. Dilbert frowned. Of course, I've taught at the university for decades. Then, when you give an exam to your students, do you already know who will pass and who will fail? Dr. Dilbert sighed. Yes, usually I can guess, based on how they studied during the semester. Aurelian nodded. Then if you already know, why do you still give the exam? Dr. Dilbert fell silent. You already know who is diligent in their studies and who is lazy, Aurelian continued. But the exam still needs to be conducted, doesn't it? Why? Because the test isn't just for you as a teacher. It's for the students themselves, so they can see their own weaknesses, improve, and grow. The room was silent again. Aurelian gazed at Dr. Dilbert, his eyes filled with unwavering conviction. The same applies to Allah. He is all-knowing. He knows who will pass and who will fail. But the test is not for him. It is for us, so that we may see where our faith stands, so that we may grow, improve, and become better. If we are never tested, how would we ever know our own strength? Dr. Dilbert lowered his head. Those words shook him. His whole life he had believed that everything could be explained through science. But today, a child had made him question his own beliefs. He searched for a counter-argument, but none felt strong enough. The audience, who had been listening attentively, now appeared deeply moved. Some even had tears in their eyes. A man in the corner raised his hand, his voice trembling. This child, he's only 7 years old, yet his words have struck deeper than any academic debate I have ever heard. I feel something changing in my heart after listening to this. A woman nodded. Me too. I always thought religion was rigid and full of rules. But today, I see a depth that cannot be explained by logic alone. Dr. Dilbert lifted his eyes to look at Aurelian, but this time there was no trace of condescension, only shock and something unfamiliar, doubt in his own beliefs. He wasn't ready to admit it, not yet. But something inside him had started to shift, and he knew this debate was far from over. Sitting still in his chair, Dr. Dilbert reflected. For years he had been in control of every debate, but this time it was different. Aurelian's words had shaken his mind. Every argument he put forward was not only answered effortlessly but also backed with logic that left him speechless. Yet, despite the growing doubt in his heart, his ego resisted. He could not let a 7-year-old child make him look defeated in front of the public. He took a deep breath and straightened his posture. "Okay, Aurelian, I admit that your explanation about tests is quite intriguing. But I still have one question. If God exists, and He is truly all just, why is there so much injustice in this world?" The room fell silent again. Dr. Dilbert continued, his voice full of conviction. "Look at the world around us. There are people who work hard all their lives yet remain poor, while others are born into wealthy families and receive everything without effort. Some babies are born with disabilities, while others are born perfectly healthy. Good people suffer, while bad people thrive in luxury. If God is truly just, why does life feel so unfair?" Some members of the audience nodded slowly. This was a difficult question, one even believers often struggled with. Aurelian paused for a moment, looking calmly into Dr. Dilbert's eyes. Then he raised his hand and pointed to a glass of water on the table. "Doctor, have you ever seen water spill from a glass?" Dr. Dilbert frowned. "Of course, everyone has seen that." "Then, when the water spills onto the floor, do you immediately say that it is wasted?" Dr. Dilbert thought for a moment. "Well, if it spilled accidentally, then yes, it would be a waste." Aurelian smiled slightly. "But what if that spilled water is absorbed by the soil and eventually helps plants to grow? Would it still be considered wasted?" Dr. Dilbert was silent. Aurelian continued. "So, is this what you call injustice? You see it only from one side, Doctor. But you forget that life is not just about what happens in this world. Just like the spilled water earlier, we don't always see the end goal directly. We don't always understand the bigger plan behind it. But the injustice that is seen in this world does not mean that real justice does not exist." He looked directly into Dr. Dilbert's eyes, his voice soft but full of confidence. "This life is not the end, Doctor. This world is just a small part of our journey. True justice does not always happen here, but it will definitely happen in the end. People who do good and suffer in this world will get their reward later. People who do evil and seem to escape justice here will not be able to run forever. God is very fair. It's just that humans are often impatient to see the results in this world without realizing that life does not end here." The audience fell silent. Some people bowed their heads, as if Aurelian's words had unlocked something in their hearts. But Dr. Dilbert still tried to hold on. He tapped his finger on the table and said, "But how can you be sure of life after death? There is no scientific evidence that proves its existence. No one who has died has ever returned to tell us what happens afterward. How can you be so sure that there is a reward after death?" Aurelian smiled. "Doctor, have you ever had a dream?" Dr. Dilbert frowned. "Of course, everyone has had a dream. When you are dreaming, do you realize that it is just a dream?" Dr. Dilbert was silent for a moment. "Sometimes no. Sometimes I feel like it's real, until I wake up." Aurelian nodded. "That's exactly how this life is, Doctor. Life in this world is like a dream, and death is when we wake up. When someone is having a nightmare, everything feels real, the fear, the suffering. But once he wakes up, he realizes it was only temporary. Living in this world is just a small part of a long journey. We will only truly wake up after death." Dr. Dilbert did not immediately answer. The boy's words pierced deep into his mind. For years he had relied on science and logic. But Aurelian's explanation was so simple, yet difficult to believe. A woman in the back row raised her hand and said, "I have never thought about it that way before. All my life I have felt that life is full of injustice. But if it's true that this life is just a small part of a bigger journey, then maybe there is a greater justice that we just cannot see yet." A PR officer next to her added, "Yes, I've always wondered about this. There is so much suffering, but maybe we just don't see the full picture." Dr. Dilbert felt his chest tighten. For the first time in his life, everything he believed in seemed to be crumbling. He looked at Aurelian with softer eyes now. So, do you think this world is just a small part of something bigger? Aurelian nodded. Yes, Doctor. This world is not the final destination. It is just a transit point. Just as we cannot judge an entire journey based on a single day, we also cannot judge God's justice based only on this life. Dr. Dilbert lowered his head. His mind was filled with questions he had never considered before. For the first time in his life, he had no answers. And in his heart, something began to change. His sharp gaze softened, replaced with an expression that was difficult to explain, a mixture of shock, contemplation, and perhaps submission. For decades, he had believed that everything had to be proven by science, logic, and measurable facts. But today, a 7-year-old boy had shaken his beliefs in a way he had never imagined. The room remained silent. All eyes were on Dr. Dilbert, waiting for his response. Some people in the audience looked moved, others deep in thought. Dr. Dilbert finally spoke, his voice softer than before. I have never heard an explanation like that. I always thought life was only what we could see, touch, and prove. But you've given me a different perspective. You've made me wonder, have I been looking at the world from only one side all this time? Aurelian smiled gently. Doctor, there is nothing wrong with asking questions. Seeking the truth is part of our journey. But sometimes the truth is not just something we see with our eyes. It is something we feel with our hearts. Dr. Dilbert took a deep breath. He realized that he had been arrogant in his thinking, always searching for answers that made sense to him, without ever considering the possibility that there was something beyond his understanding. He looked at the young boy in front of him and asked in a softer tone, So, do you believe God exists even though we cannot see him? Aurelian replied, Doctor, have you ever seen the wind? Dr. Dilbert frowned. Number Y can only feel and see its effects. It is the same with God, Aurelian said. We cannot see him directly, but we can feel his presence through everything around us. We can see how the universe is so orderly, how our hearts can feel love and compassion, how justice still happens, even when it is not immediately visible. All of these are signs of God's existence. Dr. Dilbert lowered his head. The boy's words struck deep. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted. Someone in the audience clapped softly, followed by others, not because there was a winner or a loser, but because everyone felt that something extraordinary had just taken place. Dr. Dilbert stared at Aurelian with contemplation. I can't say that I immediately believe, but today you have given me something more valuable than any debate I've ever had. You've given me a new thought to explore. Aurelian smiled. Searching for the truth is the first step, Doctor. Allah always guides those who sincerely seek him. The atmosphere in the room felt warmer now. What had started as a debate had turned into a moment of profound learning for everyone. Dr. Dilbert stood up and extended his hand. Thank you, Aurelian. I will remember this day. Aurelian accepted the handshake with great respect. May you find the answers you seek, Doctor. The room filled with genuine applause, not for victory but for the realization that something profound had happened. This was not just a debate between logic and faith. It was an encounter that showed how they could complement each other. Many believe that everything must be proven by science and logic. However, there are many things in this world that cannot be explained by numbers and theories. The existence of God, true justice, and life after death require more than just physical evidence. They require a heart willing to accept and a mind open to deeper understanding. Aurelian, with his innocence and wisdom, taught us that faith is not just something to memorize or learn. It is something that can be felt and understood with the right logic. Meanwhile, Dr. Dilbert, despite decades in academia, realized that there were still things he had yet to fully understand. This shows that it is never too late to seek the truth, as long as we are willing to open our hearts and minds. Life is not just about what we can see. There are greater things beyond our understanding. And for those who truly seek the truth, God always provides guidance in the most unexpected ways.